Than enough.
Recording.
Alright. Hey there, Natura Review Hub. Promise you guys I'd do a chainmail video. Japanese chainmail is one of the things that's a little bit hard to find info on these days, so hopefully I can show you what little I know. Special thanks to Scotty, of course, for filming this, and special thanks to Anthony Cummins for getting this whole thing going. So, let's have a look here. So, main patterns you see of Japanese chainmail are the square pattern, a pattern that's made up mostly of triangles and has a way of making these hexagons, which are kind of the base unit of the chainmail. Then you've got what's called nanban Kusari. Kusari is the word for chain. Nanban is one of the words that they're using for Western foreigners coming to Japan. It's slightly derogatory, but oh well, historical term. So I guess how to approach this is first describing how these are linked together, then I'll give you an actual step-by-step of how to do it. So the native forms of Japanese chainmail are linked together with, you have these main base rings, and then they're connected with these staple-like rings. Quite different than the Western weaves, where you can see everything is the same size of ring, but they're all interlaced with these alternating rows going different directions from each other. Japanese chainmail is always sewn onto fabric. It never hangs loose like foreign chainmail does. So even when a foreign design is used, it's still sewn on. And the types of fabric used, I'm not going to get into this video. I still have yet to experiment with that stuff, so I don't think I should talk on it. But I can point you guys to a good link for that in the comments for the video. So the base way of doing Japanese chainmail to start off with is you make a chain. Now, you're just going to link the main base rings together with a series of the staple-like rings. So going off of that, I'll show you how to do this. Most Japanese chainmail is made with 18 gauge wire. That's important. Use galvanized steel is what I'd recommend. It's going to be the same strength as the original Japanese wire, but the galvanized aspect of it will help stop it from rusting, which is a good thing to have. Main thing you're going to be doing to make these rings is you get a mandrel. So a mandrel is a rod that you wrap the wire around. Cut off a manageable section from it. Not too long, not too short, because you're always going to have some excess, and if you do too many short chunks, you're just going to end up wasting a lot of wire. But it's cheap, so it doesn't really matter that much. It just depends on whether or not you're worried about wasting things. So cut off a section. That's probably, that's about a workable section. So grab your mandrel. Start by getting a little bit of bend on here. Now this is kind of a ghetto way of using a mandrel. A lot of them are actually rigged up, in a wooden brace. You have a hole in the rod, and you wind it winds the coils around. I can just do this by hand because it's a little bit easier for me, and I'm in a college dorm, so can't expect to have too much hardware-wise. One thing I forgot to mention, I apologize, tools you'll need. Get a couple pairs of pliers, 2 needle nose, or a needle nose and one of these is good, and some kind of wire cutter. The inbuilt wire cutters for these aren't going to reach into the rings to cut them. You'll see why in a second. So pretty much, it's going to grab one of your pliers, grab at this end here, have like this little excess piece so you have something to grab onto, and you just start coiling it on there. You want to get tight. I think you get the gist of it. Don't, over wrap it, of course. You see how you get started. Now, I got one coil already done, and I'm going to show you parts that are good, parts that are bad, parts that are workable. This weave right here, where it's real tight, is exactly what you want. You can't get much better than that. Where you see these slight gaps, not the best, but it's workable. The worst possible, as in these rings are going to be all over the place. The gaps in them are going to cause different lengths, which means the rings won't be of the same sizes, and it's going to cause a lot of problems with your pattern. Do not have spaces like this. Get as close to this as you can. If it's like this with a few mistakes, it's fine. When you're done with that, you'll just slide off the mandrel. Now I'm going to use some slightly bigger rings as a demonstration point. These are the ones I'm using for the nanban Kusari. 1/8 of an inch inner diameter is what you use for the classic Japanese rings that you'll use in Japanese weaves. This is a 3/16 of an inch diameter, which is the smallest inner diameter you use for nanban Kusari. I recommend 1/4 of an inch. This is a real dense pattern, which isn't very commonly seen in Japanese armor. You'll want the 1/4 of an inch pattern. But anyways, so here's the 3/16. I use a nail as a mandrel, just cheap, easy way of getting a mandrel. Pull it off. Now you want to cut off the excess parts that aren't going to make a perfect ring. So you see right here where there's this excess? So I want you just to cut it off here. Now you have your ring started. Cut off this piece of excess too. Now you're going to try and cut in a straight line down this thing as much as possible. And what you do is you create a bunch of rings this way. So if you have a look, it creates a pretty much perfect ring. And they're easy to close. Japanese rings are always butted. Now these are a little bit larger than the rings you want to use for the native Japanese patterns. You can use this size, it's just less common. But I'm going to go ahead and use them because it'll be a little bit easier to see on camera for you guys. And these example pieces I've made aren't pretty, but they give you the idea. These were made with the 3/16. You want to use 1/8 for these. So, want to get, we'll make this square pattern first. You want to get 4 rings closed. Get them butted. Oh, now one thing I do want to show you with these, I'll just let that one go. If you have gaps in the butting, it makes the armor much weaker. I'm not using a very good pair of cutters, and if you can zoom in here, Scotty.
Oh, I've been zoomed in the whole time.
Okay, good. Right here you'll see that the butting right here isn't perfect because the way it cut, it kind of made it angular. So it makes it hard for it to get a real good contact point, and it makes the armor not hold together as well. But you want to get it as close in as you can. You can squeeze a little bit on the sides, just try and keep the ring shape. Don't squeeze too hard, or else you'll get stuff like this happen. I'll go ahead and destroy this ring to demonstrate. So you might be crimping on these edges to kind of get nice and pretty, and then you're like, well, I'm just going to manhandle it a little bit. This has happened to me on tons of rings. You start squeezing it a little bit too tight, like, oh, I'm getting good shape, and then bam. That ring's gone. You're not going to reshape that very well, and the time it takes to reshape that is pointless, so just toss in your little scrap pile. So, once you have enough of these rings going, I think I'll cannibalize a few from another demonstration I had set up here. No worries. I'll grab these 3. So I'll show you guys how to weave Japanese, classic kind of native patterns, but I'll also show you how to weave non-bond Kusari. But I'll make it brief because there's 1,000,001 videos on weaving 4-to-1 European chainmail patterns. That's not exciting. So you're going to have these little connector rings, which I describe like staples. Remember how you're using 18 gauge for the Japanese main rings? Well, you're going to use 20 gauge, which is a little bit thinner, 20 gauge or less for the connection rings. You can compare the sizes right here. You can see there's quite a bit of a difference. Let me grab this bit. Now the way you're going to do this on the mandrel is a little bit different.
Do you mind holding that for the camera a little bit, just a little longer so that I can...
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
You can see the difference between those. This is quite a bit stronger than this. So you're going to want 2 1/8 of an inch rods. I recommend going to your hardware store and just getting them to cut in half. Now you can weld these together, but I prefer not to, so I have one that's separable. I can still wind this tightly. Keep these together very close. So remember, 2 1/8 of an inch rods. Cut off your section of 20 gauge. I believe I have a piece already cut around here somewhere. I do. And you're going to start off very similar to the last one, where you get this excess part going so you have something to grab onto with your pliers. Whoops. Grab here, and you'll just get your rod started. Like this. 20 gauge is very, very thin, weak stuff. You can just move it with your thumbs, I'm pretty sure. If not, don't feel bad about having to use some pliers. Sometimes this stuff has to be manhandled a little bit. But as you can see, you're just going to wrap this up there as you go, just like any of the other ones. I'm not going to take all the time wrapping this, but you get the concept. You're going to try and cut straight down the middle. If your cuts start veering off to the side, just cut off a little bit of excess off of the next one and keep cutting down straight. Now eventually what you'll get are a bunch of rings like these oval shaped ones. Now in the examples I've already made, I used a double ring setup, which makes it a lot stronger on the connections, as you can see. This is very common in most examples of the Japanese chainmail I've seen. I don't see a whole lot of them with one. Another way of doing it is you can also double up the main rings, which makes it a lot stronger, but that was a little bit much work for an example piece. So what you do, grab these, see how it's not fully open. You want to open it just a little bit, but not destroy the integrity of the ring. Move that out. Just enough to get these 18 gauge rings on there. and you slip on 2 of them. Close the ring. Maybe fine it a little bit because these are a little bit chunky. But I'll let you guys experiment with that because there's a million and one ways to do this. And so you get your first 2 together. Grab the next ring. Get another one of the round ones. Get on there. And close it. Didn't close that one too tightly, but you get the idea. So you start getting a chain going. Now I've got a pre-made chain for this. Now what we're going to be making is a square pattern, and so I'll show you how to do that. Start off by making a chain long enough. Probably want a little bit longer than this one. But what you're doing is you're going to fold these over and make boxes. You can see how the connector ring will go between these 2. I'll give you an example of that real fast. I'll just do it with 1. Actually, no, I'll do it with 2, just to show you how that works. And Scotty, if you need to take a break.
Oh, dude, I could, if this is like 20 more minutes, I'll probably be fine, honestly.
Okay, good.
Yeah. If you have a lot of detail, don't feel like you need to rush.
No, it's fine. So this makes a triangle. That's another pattern, which is for Kusari. Or you just move another one over, and you get the box pattern, which is, let's see, what's my reference here? It is called Kusari. So, for Kusari, you're just making these little squares. Close this one up. There we go. See how the connector ring's really well butted? That's very important for the strength.
Here, hold that up for a minute and I'll just get a close-up.
That's how well they should be butted. There's also another way of doing it where you make a really long piece and you actually can wrap it around a couple of times instead of using 2 separate rings, which is a very, very strong setup. It's just a little bit tricky to work with your hands. And you see how this makes a little box right here. And of course you want to use a second ring for that to match the others. Now you notice how you still have chain hanging off. Well, all you have to do is just fold these over again. And you have another box. And you just connect those 2. Eventually, we'll get it set up like this. Now this one's very crudely done because I wasn't using the mandrel for the little staples in between. I was just cramping by hand, which was not a fun project. I do not recommend. Definitely use the 2-rod mandrel to make these. Definitely do that. Ooh, what did I drop? Oh, just one of my spools. Your spool should look like this, and it's going to be pretty much like a coil spring when you're, before you start cutting them, for the round ones. For the one on the mandrel that I was doing now, the 20 gauge, you'll see it's an oval shape. So definitely use that. That will save you all kinds of hair pulling. So you get that shape. You can build it out from there and keep making these chains of it and just building it up. You can get a large surface area. Another way of doing it with the square mail is you'll have a section here and here. You'll have an actual open area in the middle. Now where that's used is areas like your around your elbow, your hips. It's flexible in that there's less mail there and allows you to move around a little bit more in it. That's integral to however you do this. That's very important. If you have too much mail sent onto there, it's just going to be stiff. It's not good. So areas that aren't going to move a lot, full weaves. So a more complex and stronger Japanese weave is Kusari. Now the way you do that with these chains is you're making sets of triangles. One of these hexagons is going to be 7 inner rings. Every single ring in this design is connected to about 6 others. It's the 6-in-1 pattern. So this is the 4-in-1. That's the 6-in-1. So I'm going to undo this ring I did here for this example piece. I'm going to show you how you do Kusari. Now there's another way of doing the 6-in-1 pattern with those triangles. It's not all actually attached to 6 each one, but rather it's a set of triangles. In fact, if you can zoom in on this part right here. So that's see how it still sets of triangles all interlocked, both open spaces. That's another one you'd use on an open portion where your like elbow will be moving. This is the example I was speaking of earlier with the spaces in between with those boxes.
Wait, which one do you mind pointing at that one again, just because I...
So these two are ones,
okay.
including this one too, are all ones you'd have in spots with lots of mobility. So I'm going to remove this spring here that made this into a box. And instead of this one, you're forming triangles. So you just fold this one over, and then you get a ring connecting all three of them. And then you make another triangle over here connected to that one. Eventually you get a pattern like this. So you can make these hexagons, you can do a lot of them. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's one of those things where many words aren't going to do a very good job of it, but once you start working on it, it'll make itself more clear. Now, the slightly trickier one I'm going to get into is Nanban Kusari, but I highly recommend it because it's very strong, but it's still a Japanese weave, and it was used from the mid-16th century onwards. Very common. Almost all Edo period chainmail suits I've seen, they follow a mix of this as well as Japanese patterns. These tend not to be on the moving portions. These tend to be on parts like, headgear or, on your wrist, or rather forearm, areas like that. But areas of movement, the Japanese seem to like using their native designs. And they'll actually link it up with a bunch of connecting wires onto this chainmail piece, so they still have their mobility. So this is always going to be mixed. It's usually never going to be on its own. To show you how strong this is, just to prove a point, don't ask why it's in my miso bag. Where is it? Oh, nope. This is just a utility knife. Not very sharp, but still proves a point. Just to show you how well I trust this chainmail.
Don't cut yourself.
Yeah, it's fine. So, yeah, it's a strong weave. The Japanese weaves aren't as strong, obviously. They're a little bit more delicate. They're very kind of finesse, but they do the job. I personally would swear more by Nanban Kusari with a mix of the others. So this is a little bit tricky to do, and I'm only going to give you a very brief